All right. So let's get started here today. Hello, welcome to the session. So this one will be a real important session because we're going to make sure that we're set up on Quip with your with the way we're supposed to have our information ready to present to our editor. So that'll be very important for all of us, and just to make sure that that the editor has something to work with and then can actually give us feedback and comments and help us to get directed in the right direction. So the first thing I want to do is play a video where Eric does go through this process to make sure that we're all on the same page. And then that will pretty much do it for today. Then we just need to go in and actually populate those fields the way he describes in the video. But I'll come back on briefly when he gets done, and then we'll talk just a minute and say goodbye. So let's share this and play the video of Eric. So let me do this and this.
Great to see everyone. Here we are. Great to see everyone. Here we are in sort of week 4, and this is kind of the transition into the writing phase. It's an exciting week, and so I wanted to share kind of a video with you guys to watch in the session this week. And I'll be doing kind of reaching out to everyone to do one-on-one calls. This is sort of a good point for us to check in, see where you're at, and really do a couple things. Figure out where you're headed on your writing style, figure out what things you need help on in the next bit of time. We're sort of moving in the writing phase. You're going to be meeting your editor in the next week or so. You're going to be starting this process. So here we are kind of in the transition next point, and we're starting into phase 2 of the sort of writing phase. So I hope you're getting ready. Kind of, again, the first chunk of this time is really dedicated to helping you, build the content, ideas, and stuff that you want to write. What we're going to come from, your interviews that you've been doing, from some of your personal analysis, as well as some of the secondary interviews you've been doing to find that inspiration from the content, as well as the credibility side. How are you learning things from the sort of research you've been doing in that way? So we're now going to be ready to start writing next week, and this session is really designed to help get you prepared for it, get you prepared for your first meeting with your editor, and really get rolling on the process of creating content. Now remember, what we've sort of described here is this is sort of our 20-week journey. We've spent really these first 4 weeks focusing on this Get Smart phase, and now we're sort of moving in the transition until this week is about preparing us to start to write stories. Now the goal of what we've been doing here really is to create this knowledge, this content from our primary interviews and secondary interviews. Understand that just because the sort of phase is sort of ending, it's not like it's done, right? You're going to be doing interviews over the next 6 months, most likely, continuing to do things and add to it. Both primary and secondary. You're going to find that this kind of constant sense of knowledge capturing from people you talk to and people you sort of research will continue. And so continue to do those things. Remember, most authors, when they sort of finish their book, have done 10 to 15 first-person interviews and 10 to 15 sort of secondary interviews. So know this is a big part of it to make sure you have really rich content as well as really deep credibility into it. But now we're going to kind of get set up in the next phase of it. And so the big part of it is one of the things in interviewing all these authors, I learned that one of the patterns they all had in common was this sort of concept that I'm going to call their to-write list. And that is that most people have sort of a running list of things that they want to write. And what that does is make sure that they're never in a place where they don't have something to write. So what we do is we call that the story index. And the story index is sort of the inventory of all the things you could write and have written as a place for you and your editor to really keep tabs on progress. So that's really what it is it's a place that's going to be someplace for you to know where you're at as well as your editor and kind of keep constant communication. This really is a tool to make sure that the collaboration works really well. So we're talking for a minute about story writing just to give you a context of it, and then we'll set you up for sort of the workshop that you're going to be doing in today's session. Now, as we talked about in the very, very early phases, really a book is just a collection of stories that are tied together through the narrative and lessons in it. And so they're slightly different if it's a nonfiction or fiction. So I'll talk a little bit about both, but understand that at the core of all of these ones, there are stories, these pieces that sort of really bring the whole book together. So it's just a collection of them. And so when you look at a nonfiction book, I'll talk first about those, which most authors are working on, but there are several people doing poetry and fiction, which we'll talk about separately. Here's the analysis of it, right? Again, on average, most nonfiction authors that work with me have done around a 30 to 35,000 word manuscript, the final manuscript they have. And so when you analyze them, on average, their story length is about 750 words. It's kind of a longer-ish blog post as each one of these stories. And on average, that means they have somewhere between 20 and 45 stories, usually about 35 stories, these sort of smaller pieces that you have. Now, stories can mean a lot of things. That could be your own personal story. That could be something, that is from an interview you do. This can be research driven. You'll find they'll be coming from a lot of the things you've been doing to kind of inspire those pieces. So again, generally speaking, about 80% of your book is going to be these research these story elements that you're going to use. And effectively, like what you'll find is that a lot of that, a lot of those pieces are going to be the things that you're going to be writing, with little chunks along the way. So the core of it really is this story writing, this content building that we call stories. And again, they can be many different things, but all of them are sort of these chunks that we're going to be focused on for the next 10 weeks. Now, a fiction book is slightly different. Again, they're slightly longer. They tend to be a little bit closer to about 35,000 words on average, but really you see about 33 to 37,000 words. Again, part of this is based on what your audience wants to read. There's this kind of question that sometimes has, like, oh, isn't my book supposed to be 50,000 words? It could. But a lot of that actually was driven by more what publishers wanted to see so they could sell books at a higher price point. The average consumer really wants about a 30,000 word book. That's what the reader wants to do. Much more than that, more than a 200-page book can feel daunting. So that's what you see kind of on average for the books in this case. They do tend to have a wider range. You see in fiction books, they tend to be more in the 720 to 1250 sort of words, sort of we call them stories or scenes, these sort of mini chunks. And that's kind of what you're going to be writing here, is these individual stories or scenes that you're going to just be creating, not in any order, not in any structure, just creating those pieces. And again, what you'll find is that they do tend to be a little bit longer in some senses, more about 900 words, but you'll find some of them will be very short chunks. You may have a very, very short sort of story or scene. Some of them could be longer, but again, on average, you're seeing somewhere between 35 and 45 sort of these sort of scenes or stories that you're going to try and write. And again, when we assemble them in the manuscript, whether it's fiction or nonfiction, we'll be assembling all those pieces together. But for now, it really is just writing these small pieces. And again, why this matters is that as an author, it can be daunting to try and write a whole manuscript. So don't even bother with it. Just try and create individual pieces. And if you've already written pieces, great. Put them in your inventory as things you've already done that you're going to keep adding to as we go. So again, the key in fiction, the same thing, the stories and scenes, that's really the core. Remember, the core of what we're trying to do in the next chunk of it is we're not using an outline. We're really just writing individual stories and scenes to kind of create these individual pieces that we're going to assemble into our manuscript. It makes manuscript building so much more effective because you're not sort of trying to figure out exactly what it's about. You're just writing pieces and then assembling it together that makes something much better. So about halfway through the story writing, we'll get together and kind of do a deeper session on kind of what are the themes you're emerging, where might this go? And then really at the end of it, we'll start to actually build the structures that you'll plug all this content into. It's really, really great. And what I've seen is it creates a much, much, much better first draft, which again is why I think so many of these books come out in a way that is publishable through this process. So here's what you're going to be doing over the next 10 weeks as we start next week. You're going to be doing about 20,000 words of first draft stories or scenes. Could be a little bit more, could be a little bit less, but that's really the target. And so on average, what that means is your target should be about 2,000 words a week. Now, keep in mind, everyone will approach this differently. Some people are every week chipping away at it. Some people are a little more episodic. They'll crank out 5,000 words and take a couple weeks off and 5,000 more. Other people will sort of make a little bit of progress, and at the end, crank out a whole bunch. It all works differently, but that's sort of the target here. And again, having that many stories and scenes allows us to build your manuscript much more effectively. Even if you don't get there, remember, having this process of learning and capturing stuff will set us up for success when we build the manuscript, because you'll wind up having the knowledge to build the actual book you want versus what you think today. So it's a learning process that's set. So from this kind of, as we get to the end of it, you'll have some themes, you'll see some directions. It'll still take the work to build it from that point. And last thing that you'll do is along this way, there'll be sort of three checkpoints, weeks 2, weeks 4, and weeks 9, where you'll sort of be trying to submit a bunch of content that you can to your editor for feedback. So again, whether you're making progress every week or whether you're doing it kind of more episodically, these 3 checkpoints are points when they'll sort of pull their comments to you and give you some feedback on how to continue. So weeks 2, weeks 4, and weeks 9 are sort of what we're going to have as those pieces come forward. So one of the core things to know is that every one of you is going to have a slightly different path. So for this week, I'll also be trying to, over the next week or so, grab time with you to talk about where you're at, what you need, but also kind of your path. Are you someone who's going to be sort of an episodic writer? Are you someone who's a bit more like regular? You put time on the calendar? Or, do you look at your schedule and think, listen, I'm going to make what I can, but I know myself, it's going to be a deadline thing. I'm going to push at the end. Whatever works. My goal is to figure out what the path is. So we'll have that in our conversation, one-on-one chat, to figure out how you're going to get there. So let me talk briefly about the concept of story index. I'm going to show you a quick little demo of how to do it, and then we're going to spend today's session really focusing on that. Again, the story index is this core insight we had that in order to really keep yourself on track and keep your editor in the know, the core behind it is this concept called the story list, or sometimes we'll call it the to write list. This idea here of what have you written, what do you want to write, this sort of running list of things. Now, again, the worst thing that you can do is basically start the week or start a day or get ready to sit down and write and say, I wonder what I should write today, right? You're going to find that inspiration is going to strike you and you want to be able to sit down and crank stuff out. If it's hey, my Saturday, when if it's raining, I'm going to go into the coffee shop and write. You want to be ready to do that. And so that's partially what we're doing here is kind of creating this sort of to-do list that you can write whenever you're inspired by. It doesn't say exactly what order, but it'll give you that inspirational sort of spark to say, hey, maybe I could write this one, or maybe I'm inspired to write this one. So again, we want to avoid this. Instead, we want you to say, let me pick something to write today that I've already done some work on. It kind of will keep you with momentum as opposed to the overwhelming feeling of, I don't know what I'm going to write. So the concept of the story index really is this running list. And I'll show you some examples. I will have an example of an author's whose story index was about partway through when I shared, when I took this sort of example of it for you named Anish. I'll show you an example there in this, and we'll walk through a quick demo for you. But the story index really is a place for you to summarize the people, the characters, the themes, the structures of the stuff you want to write. So for every single story or scene, you're going to keep a line in there. This is what you might write. Now, this could be a longer one or a shorter one. It sort of is up to you in that way. But the story index is a tool to personalize. It's a little bit like a running to-do list for you, a to-write list, but you can wind up updating it how you want. Most importantly, though, this is the tool that you're going to use to kind of communicate with your editor. Kind of where are you at? What's the progress like? What are things looking like? How's your writing going? So the key goal is to keep it updated. Every week of these sessions, you're going to spend a couple minutes making sure it's updated, making sure you've shared it in that way. It is important because, again, remember, your editor is someone who wants to know where you're at. It's not that they're checking up on you. They want to check in on you to sort of see how it is. And so they know where you're at and what's going on. So remember, the goal of the story index is something that you're every week going to be sort of keeping updated, even if it's nothing sort of urgently that you're adding to it because you didn't make progress this week on any stories. That's fine. But it's one of those things you want to keep updating, add things and ideas into it. You'll find it's a really powerful tool. Now, you may have other to-do lists that you do. You can simplify the story index if you don't want to put as much information in there, but this is the way that you and your editor are particularly going to communicate. So here's a good example. You'll see I put this sort of sample from Anish Reddy has a book coming out this spring that's about kind of a topic he was exploring around the idea of entrepreneurship through acquisition. So this idea that sort of entrepreneurs are now acquiring or buying businesses, sort of small businesses, and winding up kind of trying to figure out how to grow them. It's a new type of entrepreneurship. And so that's what his book is really about, that premise. So what I did here is I pulled an example. He's a student at UVA, so just to give you an example of some things there. And so here's kind of the journey he's taken. So as you'll see in this one, he's right here got his interviews dashboard, his research dashboard, and his story index. Remember, the interview dashboard is where you put the notes on the people you've interviewed or the notes on the people that you want to interview, tracking that one. The research dashboard is more where you do your secondary interviews, your research that you're doing, things you find interesting, kind of a running list there. And then the stories index is what we'll talk about today. It's kind of where you put the story ideas that emerge from that work. So just quickly to work through it, here's an example of some of the stuff Anish did. He really went for it. He used the stories, the interview dashboard to kind of really go into certain things. So you can see some of the names, the notes that he took on those sorts of people, and kind of some things that he had, what he was doing onto it. You also see kind of this list of interviews he did. He wound up doing about 20 interviews over the course of this entire process that he used to color his book. So that was kind of his approach, where he was. And again, this is stuff that happened over several months. So he wasn't at this point at the very beginning, but one of those things that, again, shows sort of his progress along the way. Here's his research dashboard, again, which is another example that we talked about kind of in last week's session, focusing on this concept of the secondary interview. So, for example, it shows the names of the people who he was researching, the article that he found, some key quotes and things like that, the story ideas, and those other sources that he had. So these are some examples of how he used his interview dashboard, his interview dashboard and research dashboard. Now, again, you may have varying levels of this. Remember, he continued to update this as he went, but this is sort of the way that he did it. You may decide to sort of skip some of this and jump right into the stories index. Totally up to you, but I want to show you sort of how these things evolve. So here is an example of his story index. Now, this is kind of what he used as his sort of running to-do list, to-write list. So what you'll see here is a sort of a series of ideas of things that he could write and things that he might want to write at one point. So I'll quickly show you it. Again, the first one is a story that he's putting together about this sort of acquirer entrepreneur called named Irv, and it talks about some detailed themes that he's got in there. The theme of maybe the thing he wants to write on, who's the hero or the main character and supporting characters, the story arc that he wants to do, any takeaways, and kind of the status of it. You see that he basically tags his editor when he's ready for review on that one and has a link to each one of the articles plus the word count. So this is, again, basically a way for him to keep himself and his editor updated on things. So again, what all of us are going to try to do this week, particularly today, is populate the first 6 to 10 story ideas that you might have that you might want to work on over the next couple of weeks. The idea here is to say, what do I know? What are the first waves of stories? So these would be the first types of things he wanted to do, the notes that he wanted to have. So I'll give you an example, right? This is, again, something from his research dashboard. So if he went out and did this research, he found this YouTube interview where of this guy, Harold Irving Grousbeck. And so, again, the title of the talk, the details on it, he has all this sort of stuff in it. And then some notes, right? He took some notes on it and sort of here's some quotes that he has, this sort of concept there. He's got some story ideas from it, more quotes in it. This is sort of the research work that he was doing, his secondary interview on this guy named Irv. So what he did is he actually turned that into a story idea. And here's, again, the details of it. The theme of it is he wanted to talk about these kinds of search firms, these search firms you could use, and more details and quotes about what he thinks it could be, who that person was, any backups, his partner named Amos, the story arc that he has in it, and the takeaways. You won't get it right the first time, the second time, the third time, but eventually get it right when it's right. His status, that he'd done a draft of it, that it was ready for review for his editor, and they linked to it. And again, you can link to stories, and I'll show you just by putting @ and the name of the story, and then the word count that he had from that piece. So again, I'm going to run it through a quick example for you just so you can see how it plays out here in Quip. So let me see if I can open up Quip as we're recording this here. And so here in Quip is an example. Again, I'm going to put this in the sample folders for you guys to see so you can see it. Again, I think you've got the dashboard, the interview dashboard, and the research dashboard. Here's Anisha's story index. So I'm going to open up the stories index just so we can see it here. And again, this looks just exactly like what we saw in here, right? So you can see what this is. So what I'm going to do really quickly is I'm going to basically show you how to kind of spend some time today. Now, let's say, for example, I'm going to go into his interview dashboard, and let's just basically say here that, Tom Feynman is someone that he wound up deciding to do, and let's see this one, we've got this sort of maybe idea down here, which is this guy, Sandro. I'm going to take this here. Sandro Mina. So we're going to basically start to populate our story index. So here's we go. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just create a new sort of story document. So let's just say that the story document that I want to do here is I want to do Sandro Mina story, right? At this point, that's all that I've got. And then I'm going to take some notes here on this sort of concept here. Here's the quote, Sandro Mina. And then let's just say the lesson here is, kind of that's the person. And then the lesson or the takeaway I've got is, in this case, or maybe the theme of it is, there are always problems, right? Always. That's maybe the story that I want to do. And I've got some notes in here. So now I've got basically a few things in here that I can eventually write, right? This is sort of the couple points. I've got some quotes in here. I've got some things in here. See if there's anything else from his research dashboard that I find about Sandro Mina that could be helpful. See, I'll go back in here. Do I have anything else in here? Yeah, nothing to the origin story in the talk. So there you go. Not a lot in it. But so now we've got this basically sort of this story here. So let's just say that, eventually I'm going to be inspired to write. I've got some of my notes in there. Maybe if I've got, I could paste, if this is a primary interview, I can paste, paste interview notes. I've got to paste some links. Again, basically just have some stuff in here so that when I'm ready to write. Now, once I start writing, let's just say, I start writing this thing and, I'll write, write. So there we go. So now what I'm going to do is I've got this sort of, again, I've got some notes of things that I might want to write in this one. This is, again, just a story idea. So you're going to try and do 6 to 10 of these. Again, high level, some notes and thoughts on it. What you're going to then do is you're going to basically go back and you're going to add this to your stories index. So I'm going to go into this sample story index, and let's just say that I don't have any here, but I'm going to basically go in and I'm going to add this in. So the hero in this case is Sandro Mina. Maybe some other notes. It's about, We'll just say it's about the problem solving. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to basically link to it. So I'm going to put an @ sign, so just the @ sign, Sandro Mina story. So there I've got this here, and I'm going to mention it in this case. And so now I basically just I can write my notes here that it's outlined in this case, or whatever it may be, and basically kind of keep myself on track. So here now I have this sort of thing, and then when I look at it and I'm ready to write, I can say, what do I need to write? What do I want to write? Maybe I decide I want to write this one about Seamus Hines, or maybe I want to write something about Jim Southern, or whatever it is. And I basically just will go in and start to write on this one. I'll just sort of basically say, great, I've got the Sandro Mina story. And again, you'll see, there's an example here of the herb story, some sort of details on what he had and how he wrote it. But again, just some sort of concepts of how he had sort of some stories, ideas, some pieces, some notes that he wound up turning into the story. So that's really, again, the goal of how you're going to use your story index. And then when you're ready for review, you just basically will tag your editor on it and say, great, like the Sandro Mina article is ready for your review. You can either tag them, or you can basically take a note here. You can basically say, let's just say, at Shonda, if Shonda Lane is my editor, I can just tag her and say, this is ready for review. So that's, again, that way I can do it in that way. I can tag my editor in that sort of. So however you're ready to use this one, that's kind of the way to do it. So again, next week you're going to be being connected to your editor. The goal is when you sit down with your editor to have this document ready for them to sort of talk about. You'll have our overall idea here and talk about some of those things, but they sort of want to know what's coming. What are the stories you want to write in these sorts of pieces? So this week the goal is to create those pieces for you. So that's the main stuff that I have here. Let me get back into my slides here and take you through the last pieces. Again, this week, try and lay out 6 to 10 initial stories in your story index. Just ideas you have, personal stories, stories from research, stories from interviews, just stories that you want to write, those scenes and stories that you want to do so that you can discuss it with your editor. Again, you may not write all of these ones. They don't even have to be that detailed, but just for now, lay out those ideas for you. And then make sure you have fun, right? This is sort of this week, because we're going to spend the entire time today doing a little bit of follow-up, a little bit of outreach, and then really focusing on populating your story index so that you have something to talk with them. And again, it's a powerful tool that you're going to find is really great for you to continue to make progress and continue to go. So we're getting to the next phase of it. I hope you're having fun. It's been certainly an adventure. I'll be checking in with y'all over the next kind of week or so to grab some time with me, talk about where you're at, where you're headed, and we're off to the races, guys. Congratulations on making it to this next phase, and now we start to write.
So that's that. Let me see here. I want to get back to this. And so the goal in the next, I would say by the weekend, because I think you're going to be scheduled with your editor. Sorry, I was off and listening to Eric. You're going to be scheduled with your editor this next week. So that's we'll need to have these things populated as soon as possible. So that's really it for today. We could do it and come back, but let's just go do it right now, and that'll end our session. So at this point, let's call it good, and we'll see you next week. Holler if you've got any questions. We'll see you.